Good morning, and let us pray. Loving and holy God, as we come together around these tables and for worship here today, we thank you for this church, for the ministry that we share in it, and for the opportunity that we have to be together. Inspire us, lead us, and guide us as we experience and go through the sacrament of confirmation today. We thank you for our bishop and for our diocese and for the ministry that we're all a part of here in the Diocese of Missouri. And I ask that you would be with us now and during this time of conversation. And all of this we ask in the name of your Son, Jesus. Amen.
Amen.
Good morning again and welcome. I'm glad that you're here. And as you continue to eat, I want to introduce to some of you someone that you may or may not have had any interaction with, but you're going to today.
Whether you like it or not.
Whether you like it or not, that's right. Bishop Dion Johnson is here for confirmation, as most of you know, and he's going to lead us through the forum and in a time of conversation. And I also want to introduce to you the Reverend Ken and Doris Westfall, who is a member of the bishop's clergy staff at the diocese. Bishop Dion.
Thank you.
You got that.
Well, good morning again. Well, good morning again to some of you from 8 o'clock, and good morning to the 10:30 folks who came a bit early. It's a joy for me to be here and to be with you. Ken and Doris can attest that when we say that we actually really love being out with people and interacting, it's something that I actually really, really do enjoy. And I always see these forums as opportunities for us to just be in conversation, that I can try to answer questions that you might have. When I was a parish priest, we would call this Stump the Rector. So you can we can stump the bishop if you really want to try. But it really is an opportunity for us just to be engaged in some conversation, and that I can try to, I love to teach. If you get me on a topic, we'll be here all morning, and I'm hopefully not to do that. But the one caveat is that all the really, really, really hard questions goes to Canon Doris. So, it just gives the job. Speaking of which, I'm going to invite Canon Doris to say a little bit about what the Canon of the Ordinary is and what she does. So, Canon Doris. Oh. Here, I'll stick that on there. There you go.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Canon to the Ordinary. You know, we Episcopalians, Anglicans, we tend to be on the verbose side, and if there's a fancy title or something that, you know, takes a lot of letters to get on a business card, we're all on it. So, Canon to the Ordinary. A canon is a member of a bishop's staff or on the staff of a cathedral, and the ordinary is that guy. The ordinary is an old term for the bishop. So, the bishop and I'm his assistant. We talk a lot. We muddle through problems. We share in taking care of the clergy. I'm also the chief of staff. So there's, and transitions. So when a church is looking for a priest or a priest is looking for a church, I get involved in that and work with them. I'm also a trained interim. So I've had like 7 experiences of going into other churches and taking them through that transitional time of in between rectors. So it's a joy to work with Bishop Dion. Your diocesan staff is true, and I mean this, and I'm not saying this because he's standing there. He's heard me say this before. Your diocesan staff is second to none, truly. I'm not talking about myself. I'm talking about everybody else. I'm the weak link in the chain, you know. And so we love what we do. We take joy in the ministry that God has given to us, and I look forward to meeting you. And congratulations to the people that are being received and confirmed and reaffirmed, and it's a joyful morning. So thank you.
Thank you, Canon Doris. The thing that she won't tell you is that we both are chocoholics. So if you come to the diocesan offices, either her office has chocolate or my office has chocolate, or all the offices in between have chocolate, just for in case you really need it.
And if it's a bad day, we know it's a bad day when he comes into my office, he goes, "Here, have a piece of chocolate." Oh my God, what's going on now?
So, As you can tell, your diocesan staff, and I say your diocesan staff because we are here to be a resource for you, for the clergy, for the congregations. We are here to be a resource. So please, if there's something that we can be helpful with, or you need assistance with, we've never done this before or whatever, please reach out to us. I mean, I talk to David pretty regularly on different things that's happening, and so we are intended to be here to be for you. And so questions, things that you might have, like things you'd like me to talk about, things you'd like Canon Doris to talk about, the floor is literally yours. Yes, John.
Hold on.
Oh.
I don't know the current status of affairs with the people south of us, because when I was practicing law about 20 years ago, I knew some people from Sykeston, and they were very disappointed at the current bishop because they had to bring all their confirmands to St. Louis, and he wouldn't travel outside of the St. Louis area. So all the outstate area, they had to bring all their confirmands into St. Louis to be confirmed. And I hope that still isn't the situation, but I guess part of this is how are we doing down south or expanding and so forth.
Great. So a couple things. I think that Bishop Smith stopped that practice about a couple years ago of doing. In some dioceses, there's been a practice of centralizing confirmation. So what it means is that instead of when you come to visit the congregation, you just do all of the confirmations in the Easter season at the cathedral or at a congregation or something like that. So it would mean that all of the folks across the diocese come together as a way of trying to make the diocese feel more connected through confirmation, et cetera. Some dioceses still continue that practice. That's just not my way of doing things, just because I think there's something sacred about being confirmed in the place that you worship every Sunday, that the places where people have been buried and baptized and married and whatnot. So, and then thinking about our congregations that are outside the metro area, they are doing different degrees, because no congregation is the same. But I will say that perhaps in the last 2 or 3 years, we've heard nothing but we're much more connected to the diocese. When I got here, Canon Doris and I had planned on Dion and Doris's excellent adventure across the Diocese of Missouri. No, we really were going to call it Dion and Doris's excellent adventure across the Diocese of Missouri. And then this weird thing called COVID happened, and consecration, everything had to change. But one of the things that we did for the first 2 years, and you were one of them, we did Zoom town halls with every congregation. And we started with all the ones that were outside the metro area deliberately. Because Poplar Bluff, which is our furthest south, is about 2.5 hours south of here. And Trinity two Kirk something in the one diocese is not good, and then 7 Trinities don't help either. But Trinity Kirksville is 3 hours from here. But one of the gifts that I think that the pandemic gave us is Zoom, and that I can be in Kirksville meeting with a vestry and never leave my house. And so that sense of being connected to each other has been deepened by being able to use that technology and whatnot. And so, like I said, I think that we are feeling the pandemic gave us the gift of being much more connected as a diocese. Doris tends to be the one who deals a lot more with some of the ins and outs of the congregations. So I'll invite her if you want to say anything you would add to that.
It's amazing how small rural churches can be so different from one another. It's a whole different culture up in Kirksville than it is down in Poplar Bluff. As rural congregations have been having a hard time of it across the church, across denominations, for quite a while. Depopulation of those areas, kids moving away, not only to college, but to get jobs and what have you. But there are some truly faithful and loving and wonderful and community-committed individuals that are attending our churches. They may not be small, but Jesus only started out with 12. So anything is possible. We have one, when Bishop Dion came to St. Louis, I kept telling him about this little church named St. Mark's, Portland. This is a congregation of 8 in a town of 82. And everybody in that community and in that county knows that if you need help, you go to St. Mark's, Portland. They are right on it. I've never heard from them. We're too old, we're too small, the whole 9 yards. So just because you're little doesn't mean that you can't do big things. And just because you're big sometimes doesn't mean that you can do really big things. It's, culture, context. But overall, we're doing okay in that area, I would say. Mm-hmm.
See, part of it too is that I've made a commitment that we have to invest in our rural congregations. Because in many times and in many places, they're the only place that is welcoming or affirming in the county. So Trinity Kirksville is the only welcoming, progressive, affirming congregation or Christian community in 5 counties. So if you drive a 5-county, and Adair County where they are is not a small county. If you drive within 5 counties of where they are, there are no other welcoming congregations. So they are it. And so there's a commitment that we want them to be there. Because if they're not there, somebody who's struggling with their faith or struggling with the faith tradition that they came up with really have no other alternative or no other place that they can go to be themselves. So there's a commitment on the behalf of the diocese to ensure that our rural congregations are surviving and thriving. So I don't know if that answers the question. Thank you. Yep. Let me know your name.
Sandy Peters.
Okay.
I could be definitely, with this question, a member of the Great Unwashed, but nevertheless, it would be very helpful if you could explain further the welcoming and affirming nature that you just referred to, because I'm not sure I totally understand it.
So, like Trinity Kirksville, I'll use them as the example. They have become a place where LGBTQ folks can go, where other minority groups that are not represented at, I think their Truman State is the university that's up there, that aren't represented by that brand of Christianity, they get to be a place of welcome and affirmation for that population. Because most of the Christian communities up there are so anti-anything that there's no room for that population. And we keep finding that more and more in almost every one of our rural congregations. I was just at Trinity de Soto, which is about 45 an hour south that way. And again, they're in the shadow of this massive Catholic church. And there's a lot of folks who have, what's starting to happen is some of the folks who have been hurt by that church for different reasons are finding that this little congregation is a place where they can come and find healing. And more of our rural congregations are that. And the joy for me is that they're embracing that. It's not like, we've been calling them from, 1210 Locust Street saying, you will be a welcome and affirming congregation because you have to be. They have just said, we realize that this is kind of our role in this town or in this community, and we're just going to embrace it. So, thank you. You're welcome. Yes.
I've read recently in the paper that members of the Anglican Communion want to be a little bit more independent of the Archbishop of Canterbury. Could you comment on that?
How much time do you have?
Well, so I'm going to start with the macro and come down to what you're talking about. So the Episcopal Church is part of the Worldwide Anglican Communion. The Worldwide Anglican Communion is about 8 billion Christians across I just did the numbers, across 106 countries and 42 provinces. So the Episcopal Church is one province of that whole thing. Christianity in the last 50 years, or the core of Christianity, has shifted from the West to the South. So the global South population of the Episcopal or the Anglican Church is about 3 times the size as the Western Church. So, like the Episcopal Church, we are 1.7 million Episcopalians in the continental United States and 17 countries. And because we forget that the Episcopal Church also includes like Venezuela and Puerto Rico and Dominican Republic and a couple other Costa Rica, Ecuador. Those are all part of our church. But the global South numbers are much, much bigger. I mean, this past summer I was at Lambeth with the gathering of all the bishops and all that stuff. And one of the bishops from South Sudan, some of you may know, Stephen Dukulo, who was companion relationship. On a Sunday morning, he goes to do confirmation, and he's confirming 200 people. I mean, on average. So the global South is much, much bigger than the church in the West. What's happening also along with that is that the polity of most of the Anglican Communion is very different than ours. So back in 2019, convention got together and elected me to be the bishop here after some time of reflection and discernment and all that stuff. In most of the Anglican Communion, there is no electing, and the laity has no say in it. The House of Bishops get together and say, oh, look, we need a bishop for Missouri. Hey, David's been doing some good work at St. Peter's. We're going to call him up and make him bishop. David gets a call. Hey, David, you've been selected to be bishop of so-and-so, and the rest just happens. There is no conferring, there's no laity, there's no voting. The archbishop usually tells everybody else kind of what to do. What's been happening is that there's a big misunderstanding on how our polity works. In the Episcopal Church, we balance the laity and the clergy in everything. The vestry is the balance with the rector. The bishop is the balance with the standing committee. The standing committee is made up of lay and ordained. So we have these mechanisms where the voice of the laity and the voice of the clergy are equally heard in as many venues as possible. That is not the case in most of the global South. The clergy have an outside, the more prestigious the thing in front of your name, the more authority you have. So, the rector, there's the dean, the canon, the bishop, the archbishop. The archbishop has pretty much total control of the whole province in most of those places. And so what's been happening is that there's an argument with the global South, about polity, about we don't understand how we organize it, or they don't understand how we organize ourselves, and we have a hard time understanding how they have a system like the way that they do. And so we disagree on things. Human sexuality is a big one that's the one this big splashy one that makes the news. Something like creation care, that we are seeing the effects, but they see the effect much more. We disagree on how to approach that. What some in the global South have said is they're wanting to walk away from the Archbishop of Canterbury because of actions of the Church of England. Church of England has allowed for the ordination of women bishops in the last couple of years, and they just allowed for the blessing of same-sex unions in the church. And that has become a wedge issue in the Anglican Communion, where the global South has said, if y'all are going to do that, we don't want to walk with you anymore. That's the macro. The micro is like anything else. It's like a swan on a pond. The swan is just gracefully gliding along, and the bottom is like furiously kicking underneath. When you get to the parish, individual diocese level, there's not a problem with the Episcopal Church or any of the other churches. It's usually the archbishop that has a problem, and everybody else has to fall in line. When the archbishop changes, most of the time, the culture in the diocese changes. So for instance, Stephen DeCulo, who we're no longer in companionship relationship with, him and I chat on Facebook quite frequently. There's no reason why we should be talking. Because according to all the big Anglican Global South stuff, they're ready to leave and they don't want to have anything to do with us. But yet if you talk to individual bishops, they are like, no, that's the Archbishop's issue. We're okay with you. We're okay with the Archbishop of Canterbury. So some of this I said that I think is a polity difference, and a big part of it is just not understanding how that we're interdependent, but we're not uniform. So it's unity without uniformity. And I think that's where our problem comes. We're wanting uniformity, and the thing is we don't do uniformity. What works here in the Episcopal Church isn't going to work in Nigeria or South Africa. So we have a common heritage, but we don't all express that heritage exactly the same way. Our context matters. In most of the African continent, you talk about sexuality and it's like it's a complete taboo subject. Here we can have the conversation. So you also have that cultural difference of here are some things. I mean, I grew up in the Caribbean, and the Caribbean culture is very reserved. You probably couldn't tell. But Caribbean culture tends to be decently reserved and all of that stuff. And so, you get the different cultural context over 106 different 106 different countries. You can't expect everybody to be, what's going to happen in Japan is going to be very different than what happens in Angola. So there's also the cultural difference that we're not taking into account. So sorry, that was the long way of answering a short question. Yep.
Bishop,
Oh, you bet.
do I have this on?
Yep.
Let's give it a try. Hi, Tim Nolker again.
Yep.
Nice to see you. In another life, this is an anecdote. When I was in a big law firm downtown, we represented the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod.
Oh.
And I would sign up for things just because I found it fascinating. It wasn't in my lane necessarily, but the battles became who owns the church, when people would struggle that way. But I wondered, speaking of church activity, can you give us an update on what's going on in our community with, is it Hope, St. Tim's, and Good Shepherd?
St. Luke and Good Shepherd.
Okay.
Yep. That is not Hope. St. Luke and Baldwin and Good Shepherd in Town and Country have now merged to be one congregation called Hope in Town and Country. So they have, the St. Luke's property still remains, this patch of gray here is the property part of what Doris has to do. So their property has come back to the diocese. Faith Christian Church of India is worshiping there, and the preschool that was at St. Luke continues to be there. So now it's just a diocesan property for ministry outreach. So Faith Christian Church of India is worshiping in that space, and like I said, the preschool continues. But those two congregations, after about a year, 18 months, between 18 months and a year and 18 months of discerning together, decided that it made more sense for them to be together, merged together as one congregation. So St. Luke is no more, and Good Shepherd is no more. We've dissolved both of those congregations, and so Hope, they chose the name that they would be Hope Episcopal Church. Others? Way back there.
I live in the vicinity of.
Think ice cream cone.
I live in the vicinity of the two churches that have joined, and I understand what you're saying, but I wonder if one of the churches has closed down and they all meet in one of them, or how does that work out?
Yep. So Good Shepherd's. Well, wait a minute. This is your. I'm going to stay in my lane.
So how would that work out? In our governance structure, that when a church closes, church buildings are held in trust for the diocese. When a church closes, the assets of that parish and the property of that parish revert back to the diocese. A merger is slightly different. What happens is that the assets of the one church that's merging into the other, they still have, it goes with them, okay? So, mergers are really complicated, and they take quite a while, not just from a legal standpoint, but from a spiritual standpoint and working on dynamics and what have you. We have some great hope for hope. See what I did there? Yeah. But mergers are, it's through the guidance of the Holy Spirit, and I'm glad that they took a new name. I think it's better that way, because what they're trying to do is to live into a new identity, and work on, shared values and things like that. I don't know, does that answer your question?
Not really.
Okay.
If I lived there and did not attend here, where would I go to church for a service on Sunday?
Okay.
Yeah, so they both dissolved, but they're both worshiping, or the New Hope is worshiping at the Good Shepherd building. So the Good Shepherd building is in much better shape. It was a newer building. The upkeep has been much better than what was happening at St. Luke. They have more property because they're on like 5 acres of land at Good Shepherd. So Good Shepherd, they discerned that the Good Shepherd property was the better place for them to try to move forward. So if you wanted to go to church at Hope, you'd be going to the former Good Shepherd property building.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, no. Worry not.
Bishop,
Others-
you've talked some
Oh.
about our creating missional communities
Yes.
in the diocese. Can you say a little bit about what those are and about how you might vision churches being involved in those in some way?
So there's some very stark facts that the church has been declining in general. When I was ordained, the Episcopal Church was 2.7 million people. When I was ordained bishop, it was 1.7 million people. So in the 20 years that I've been ordained, 1 million people have gone on to greater glory or left the church. That's the bad news. The thing is, or the not so bad news, is that's Christianity across the board. You may notice in neighborhoods or whatnot, churches are being sold by different denominations and stuff like that. Christianity in the West has been on a pretty sharp decline for the last 20, 30, 40 years. Even our mega churches that are, that we kind of think like the big mega churches, they've plateaued and they're beginning to decline as well. So that's the downside. The good side is there's a deeper hunger right now for connection and, scary enough, knowing more about Jesus. Think about what I just said. There's a deeper clamoring for a deeper connection and knowing more about Jesus. The Episcopal Church just had a survey done over a couple months last year, just asking folks some basic questions about Christianity and faith and all that stuff. And the PB just shared some of this with us. 85% of millennials want to know more about who Jesus was and why he's important in the life of the world. 85% of millennials. Which group is not in church right now? Millennials. I suspect that you probably have some kids or grandkids or someone who will say these words, I'm spiritual but not religious. Right? Because one of the problems is they are not seeing Jesus in us. Let me say that again. They are not seeing that Jesus that they want to know more about in us. And when I say us, I don't mean, you specifically. I mean in Christianity with a big C. When they were asked back in 2017, when you hear the word Christian, what's the first thing that comes to mind when we ask millennials? The number one was not loving. It wasn't hopeful. Self-righteous and homophobic were number 1 and 2. That's what they thought. Loving, joyful, hopeful did not make the list. Let me say that again. The things that we claim didn't make the list. So the church with a big C has a PR problem. We are perceived as not looking anything like what Jesus looks like. So what does this have to do with missional communities? One of the things that we are finding more and more is that for the church to be viable down the road, we have to be able to, bridge that divide between millennials and the church and all that stuff. And the way that we have found, or that the research is telling us, is that millennials and other folks who would be looking to come to do church, to engage with church, sees the church's role in service as the best place to reflect how Jesus was. So what they're saying is, when you go out and do things in the community, when you go help build houses with Habitat for Humanity, or have a big unhoused feeding program, or when you go out and do things, that's where they're seeing us being truly who we are as Christians. And then there's a report that came out not too long ago that said for the Episcopal Church to have a long-term future, we need to plant across the whole church 1,400 new congregations. That's just 1,400. I mean, I've committed that we're going to try to plant at least 10 within the next 10 years, just because for us to have a long-term future, that's what we kind of have to do. Those start with missional communities. Missional communities are communities that gather for a specific reason that may not be for just worship. So they can gather together around a ministry. So, I know that you all support Trinity Central West End food pantry ministry. See, that's almost its own missional community. They get together, they're feeding someone, they're doing a ministry. My hope is, and once we kind of develop this further, is to invite congregations to think about, well, where is there an underserved population nearby that you could start a new missional community? A laundry of love. A flake for people to get together and do Bible study and prayer or book study or something like that. How could we have an impact on that community that might be nearby where we don't have a presence? Again, not long-term that becomes a full-fledged congregation, because some of these things are not going to ever become full-fledged congregations, but that they could become missional outposts for where we do ministry in that community. Out in the former building of St. Albans in Fulton, we just had, her name is Jessica Wachter. She came to us from the United Methodist Church. Thank you all. She just planted, or in the middle of planting, a missional community that's a dinner church. Dinner church. They get together every Sunday at 5 o'clock for dinner, and then they have worship after for whoever wants to stay for worship. She started that back in August of last year. They're averaging about 35 people showing up for these things. I would say 90% of her folks that come to that never had any church experience. So these are the folks that we're trying to that we're trying to bring into, and then the other 10% of people who have been really hurt by the church and wanted nothing to do with church. But they decided they want to be a part of that because it's not like traditional church. It's Sunday, it's dinner, it's fellowship. They deal with the unhoused. They deal with people who are in different stages of recovery. They're literally meeting people where they are and saying, we're just going to walk alongside you. One of the other ones that's happening is Grace African Christian Connection. There is a pretty big African diaspora population here in the St. Louis area. And in Mtipe Kugani, who's a priest that was ordained last June, he's from Tanzania. He's started this community that meets once a month at the cathedral, but during the rest of the time, they get together in small groups and do individual projects for international students and stuff like that. Their once a month gathering for worship and fellowship averages about 100 to 150 every time. And they only started last October. And so there's another missional community that in the diocese that's kind of beginning to, we're trying to figure out what comes next for them, because they have gotten much bigger than we thought, much faster than we thought. And then the last one that I can think of would be Josh Huber over at Calvary in Columbia. He's gathering young people at Mizzou. We had no campus ministry at Mizzou. for a very long time. And so he is part of his job as the assistant rector at Calvary in Columbia is to engage with Mizzou and to begin to plant that. And he's doing it in conjunction with the ELCA Lutheran Church. And so that's beginning to bear fruit. And so we're looking down the road to invite congregations to partner with, hey, maybe, St. Peter's and St. Michael and St. George gathers together and says, hey, we can help, with this missional community over here to start something new. Because if you look at the DNA of this place, and lots of our congregations, planting a new congregation was kind of what you did. After a while, you kind of went like, oh, look, there's Warson Woods doesn't have people, doesn't have a church. Let's see if we can do something there. Those days of just planting congregations in some degree are over, but being able to plant missional communities that could evolve into different types of churches or different ways of being church, I think is really exciting. Yeah.
There's a huge difference between making Episcopalians and discipling others to know Christ. And so before, a lot of the thought was, well, how can we get more people in the church to be Episcopalians? But that's not what it's about. It's about Jesus, and it's about sharing your life and the difference that Jesus makes in your life and why you're a Christian. And so we're concentrating not on making Episcopalians, although that would be very nice if that happened, but that's not our end goal. Our end goal is teaching people how to be disciples and how to disciple others, and that's very different.
Well, and a big part of it is recognizing that we are in a different era. Once upon a time, you opened the door and people just showed up. And that's not the reality anymore. On Sunday morning, people have about 12 different options. And if you have kids, there's soccer on Sunday morning and once upon a time, that was not the case. So the world has changed. I was at an ordination not too long ago, and the preacher had said a line that made me do a double take. He said, Jesus is coming back. The 1950s isn't. I was like, ooh, there's a bumper sticker. But it's true. Jesus is coming back. The 1950s is not. Those glorious days, they're beautiful days, but the church has to adapt for what's coming into the future. My goal before I retire.
You can't do it before me.
In 17 plus years, is that every Episcopalian can answer the question, who is Jesus and why is he important to me, in 30 seconds or less? That's one of the questions that I ask of everybody, people in the ordination process, people coming into the diocese. I always ask the question, who is Jesus to you and why? Who is Jesus and why is he important to you? Give me your elevator speech that's 30 seconds or less. Because I believe every single one of you have your own unique story of why you're here and why you're following Jesus, and we have to be able to tell that story. We tend to think of evangelism as that big word that we kind of cringe in Episcopal circles when you say evangelism, like a shiver goes through most people's spine, because we think of it like the old-fashioned way of evangelism, have you found Jesus? I didn't know he was missing. Wait, did I say that out loud? Or, I keep seeing these signs. Where are you spending eternity, smoking or non-smoking? Like, who is going to be converted? Oh, I want to make sure that I don't go to the smoking section, so I'm going to go to church on something. Who's converted by this type of stuff? But you telling your story to someone to say, when I was going through a really hard time, these people in this room came to help me. When I had a loss, when my mom or my dad or, I lost a child or whatever it is that you lost, that someone from the congregation came and reminded you what it felt like to be, a follower of Jesus. Those are the stories that you get to tell. That's evangelism at its best. It's just telling people the places where you have experience. I talked at 8 o'clock about abundance and joy. Those places where you've discovered the abundance and joy, that's the story that you get to tell. That's the best of evangelism. Just telling people the story. Like, oh my gosh, when I was going through a really hard time, my priest came and sat at the side of my bed and prayed with me, and it made such a difference in my life. Or, I had a loss, and the church brought me bacon casseroles. Because we Episcopalians love a casserole. Brought me bacon casseroles or something like that, and they fed us. I'll stop with this one. I did a funeral when I was in parish priest for this, just a regular member, but her family had no church background or whatnot. And I did her funeral, and we went through all the things. And the congregation sent food. Kind of, this is what we do. We sent food for like 2 or 3 weeks to her house afterwards, just because grief. You feed grief. And the daughter, as she was getting ready to leave town, came back to me and said, I never knew that this is what that the church did stuff like this. I'm like, what? This is we in the Episcopal Church, what do we respond with for everything? Food. But again, she's never experienced that hospitality. And the reality is, you won't know unless we're able to tell those stories. Tell the story of, when you were going through that really, really hard time in your life, and someone from the church, someone from your faith community reassured you that you were going to be okay, that somebody walked with you in that journey. That's evangelism at its best, and that's at the core of what these missional communities are. How do we heal some of the hurts that are out there in the world and people that have been church hurt in a way that is healthy and life-giving? Because some of the messages out there for Christianity are terrible. Let's just face it. Some of the stuff that some of our fellow Christians say and do are, to me, on a good day, appalling. I keep going like, please stop talking. And so for me, I see the church taking on the role of being able to heal folks and bring them and show them something different. And I see David got up, which means that my time is probably up. What does it mean when the rector gets up and slowly starts walking towards the bishop?
Bishop Dion, thank you so much. And thank you all for being part of this.